Good morning, everyone. It is Sunday, January the 24th, 2021. It is currently 7:53 a.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from Victory Baptist Church, located here in foggy Ovalo, Texas. Yes, there's a thick fog outside. I can't even see the highway that's right here next to the church. Looking out the window, it is just a thick cloud of fog. That's what it's like outside here in Ovalo, Texas this morning. It's a warm morning because of the thick fog. It's just a warm. It's kind of, when I was driving in this morning, it was kind of this eerie, foggy. Like I couldn't drive very fast because I could barely see in front of me, and that's kind of what it's like outside. It's just this. It gives this kind of a weird vibe this morning. When I got out of the car here at the church, I just kind of stood there and was like, oh, this kind of, it just has that feeling this morning where you just don't have a lot of energy, right? There's not a lot of, it just feels like you just kind of want to just turn off the lights and maybe go back to bed kind of feeling. That's kind of what it feels like this morning. But here I am inside the church, and now I have to try to push that feeling aside and focus on the task in front of me. And one of the reasons I'm spending a little extra time here in my introduction just talking about the weather is because my voice, I don't know how, I'm sitting here trying to gauge my voice this morning. I don't know how well it's going to hold out this morning, but we will see. We will see. I'm having a little bit of voice problems this morning. Get ready to take a drink of water. But that's all right. All right, here we go. All right. Here we go. We got a lot to do today. Here's the situation. This morning at 11 a.m., we were supposed to have an in-person celebration of the Lord's Supper. People were going to arrive at 11. We were going to do some prayer, some scripture reading, and then partake of the Lord's Supper, and then everyone was going to leave. Well, late last night, I was informed that 3 individuals from the church have been exposed to COVID. So we had to just scratch everything, cancel everything again, because of, even though we're a small church, the number of people that's either had COVID, exposed to COVID, it's been pretty crazy. So the whole purpose was to do it this morning because I thought this would be the morning where we could have the most people present. But if you take out basically 3 people, and that represents obviously their family members as well, that I was like, that defeats the whole purpose. So we stopped that, and now I have to try to figure out, well, now how do I work the rest of this morning? Because everything that I had planned is kind of out the window. What do I do? Well, when I don't know what to do, I go back to things that we are currently working on. And I thought I would just start this morning by going back to the book, The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. I think that's a good place to start. A little spiritual reading for this foggy Sunday morning here in West Texas, a morning where everything seems out of whack. And I got to try to figure out how to move forward this morning. Well, just go back to what we've been working on, which is the Imitation of Christ. And I think it will be valuable. And we got a chapter we need to finish up this morning. So we're just going to work through it and see what challenges await us in this chapter. Hopefully it'll be beneficial. And hopefully it'll be beneficial to not just to me, but to you as well. All right? Does that sound good? I hate that feeling. I hate that feeling that everything's out of whack. When you kind of have all of your plans and all your plans go boom. I hate that. But I think one thing that we can always learn from a spiritual perspective is when everything seems to be falling apart and things that you thought was going to go a certain way doesn't go that way, you just go back to the things of God. You go back to focusing on things from a spiritual perspective. We always have to respond to circumstances. I think this is an important spiritual principle. We always have to respond to circumstances by refocusing on what is true spiritually. right? Like we can't control circumstances. We can't do that. So whenever we are confronted with circumstances that are beyond our control, that may be frustrating, that may be painful, that may be irritating, that may be confusing, then what we do is we turn back to spiritual truth. We turn back to the spiritual reality. We turn back to the things of God, because those spiritual realities, those spiritual truths, they're not impacted or affected by circumstances. What is true spiritually is true spiritually no matter what is happening around us, no matter what circumstances we are encountering, no matter what we are experiencing. We always go back to what is true in the scriptures, and we partake of spiritual food. We stand on that spiritual foundation because it is not moved or changed by our circumstances. I think sometimes I'll use this illustration because that's how I started. I think sometimes circumstances is like being in a fog, right? It's like you can't see in front of you, you can't see behind you, you can't see to the left, see to the right. You're just surrounded in this fog of circumstances that can bring confusion, frustration, discouragement, depression, irritation, and you can't see. So what you have to do is you just have to stop where you are and say, okay, I can't see through this fog of circumstances, but I can see right where I'm standing. And what I'm going to do is right where I'm standing, I'm going to focus on the light of what is true spiritually. I'm going to turn my focus to things of God, things of the Bible, things from a spiritual perspective, because that then gives you light right there. It may not give you light where you can see way down the road, but it gives you light right there to your next step. You can see right there in front of you. You know how this works in the fog. If you've ever driven in the fog, you have a temptation to turn on your bright lights, right? You have your high beam lights. You have this temptation like, hey, I can't really see. Let me turn on the high beams. And immediately you're just confronted with a cloud of fog in front of you. You have to the low beam lights give you the ability to see. You can't see maybe far down the road, but right in front of you, you have a better chance of seeing what is there. I think the same thing is true when circumstances don't go our way. The things of God is in a sense, they give us light right there to our next step. They give us light right there in front of us. And we sometimes want the fog to go away. We want the circumstances to get better. But we can't fix that. We can't change that. Like, I'm so tired of the COVID situation. I'm so tired of the fact that people are dying. I'm so tired of the fact that people are getting sick. I'm so tired that hospitals are overwhelmed and healthcare workers are having to deal with, things that they probably never imagined. I'm so tired that COVID has divided a country and people are fighting each other. But guess what? I have no control over any of that. I can't change any of that. I don't like how COVID has impacted my church. I don't like how COVID has impacted other churches. I don't like the fact that COVID is dividing churches. I don't like any of the situation around me. It's like a fog. But what I can do is walk into this building and say, you know what? I can't change the fog out there. I can't make it go away. But I can, in a sense, turn on the light right here with a Bible, picking up this classic book, The Imitation of Christ, and focus on what is true spiritually. Struggle with what is true. Reject that which isn't true. But set my mind on the things of God. Set my focus there, because that gives me light and certainty in the midst of the fog of uncertainty. The things of God is what we can always cling to. The Word of God is what we can always cling to, because it is not impacted by the circumstances. Circumstances impact us emotionally. They frustrate us emotionally. But then we have to set aside our emotions and say, okay, let me get back to spiritual truth, because that spiritual truth then gives us something to hold on to. It keeps us from being tossed to and fro. It's like an anchor. It anchors us down. and or in a sense of fog. It gives me that, in a sense, that low beam light where I can see right in front of me. I can see the next step. And I think that is so important. And maybe that's the whole point in what we're going to try to do right now, is we're just going to say, look, this whole day, I don't even know how the rest of the morning should work. I really don't know. What do I try to do now? I've just got to try to figure it out. So you know what? I don't have all the answers. So let's just turn our mind to the Imitation of Christ, and let's just meditate on some spiritual principles and some spiritual truth, and see if it provides us some kind of light for right here, right now. Right there's kind of that's a free lesson. That's a free lesson in this discussion. All right. So are you ready? All right. You know where we are. We are in chapter 19 of the Imitation of Christ, book 1, chapter 19. And the title of this chapter is Exercises of a Religious Person. Exercises of a Religious Person. Now, remember, we started this chapter. We took a big detour. And the reason we did so is right here in the very beginning of this chapter, it mentions this idea of virtues. So we looked at the 4 cardinal virtues that's kind of found within Catholicism. We discovered that those virtues are also biblical virtues, and that we really needed to think about them. We also discussed that when it says exercises of a religious person, most likely Thomas à Kempis has in mind those who are part of a religious order, like a monk. But we are going to see what principles he has here and how they can apply to your spiritual life and my spiritual life. And, of course, we're going to try to figure out how these principles are biblical or if they're not biblical. All right, so that's our focus here. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 19, Exercises of a Religious Person. Exercises of a religious person. And see that talking a little bit? Now my voice has warmed up a little bit. I was really struggling there at the beginning. You don't even know. As soon as I started talking, there was like this severe pain in my throat. And I was like, I'm going to have to stop this live broadcast. But now I feel much better. So are you ready? Here we go. Exercises of a religious person. And you know what? I think in some ways, having to talk a little bit before we got started gave me the ability to kind of think about some of those things, about the fog of circumstances and the certainty of spiritual truth. I think there's a valuable lesson in that. Even though I was just talking to fill up that time, I was just trying to get my voice warmed up. There was some valuable lessons right there, and I don't want you to overlook them. All right, so here we go. Exercises of a religious person. This is how Thomas à Kempis begins this chapter. The life of a good religious person ought to be mighty in all virtues. So Thomas à Kempis believes all of those who are a religious person, now his primary focus would be those in a monastery, but for us, we could read it this way. The life of a Christian ought to be mighty in all virtues, that he may inwardly be such as outwardly he seems to men. Okay, now obviously a person who's in a religious order, those within say Catholicism, those religious orders, you're going to have. They're going to be noticed by men by their dress, whether the way they dress, whether they're wearing a robe, maybe sometimes the way they did their hair. Different things would say, oh, they are a monk or they are a nun. They're known by the way they dress. They appear to be religious outwardly. What he is saying is the inward needs to match the outward. So for us as Christians, we may be known as being Christian because of our church affiliation or because of certain things we do outwardly. He says we need to be mighty in virtue so that the inward will match the outward. Now, this plays a very important role in the context he's stating it, because a monk is going to be known by the way they dress, right? I mean, they're going to be known, that's a monk. Okay, that's a nun. It's going to be known. That's, because of there's a certain aspects of the way they look that people are going to know. He's saying that we need to be mighty in virtue so the inward and the outward can match. Well, the same principle needs to be true for you and for us, for me and you. Okay, for both of us, for all of us. We have to strive to make the inward match the outward. And I just think that sometimes we focus on the outward. And I know we say we care about the inward. I know we say that. We know we say that, but it's so easy just to worry about sins. We worry about the sins. And I think this is why those virtues are so important. The virtues really deal a lot with internal attitudes, internal ways of thinking. I think we're very good at cleaning up the external. We really are. I mean, if you've been in Christianity for any length of time, you know, okay, I don't say these words. I don't do this. I don't do that. And we can really focus so much on external behavior that we forget internal virtue. Let me say that again. I think we become almost experts in modifying, cleaning up, polishing the external behavior while ignoring the internal virtues that should lead to the proper external actions. We have to make sure that the internal virtues are there, which then should drive the external behavior. Sometimes we do external behavior modification without any development of the internal virtue that should lead to that outward behavior. Sometimes we try to pull off the outward behavior without the reality of the internal virtue, which then just creates all kinds of problems and hypocrisy, and it just leads to all kinds of issues. So let me read this again. The life of a good religious person ought to be mighty in all virtues, that he may inwardly be such as outwardly he seems to men. And with reason, there ought to be much more within than is perceived without. Now, Thomas à Kempis goes on to say, look, what is inwardly, there should be more, think of it this way, there should be more inward virtue than there is outward behavior. In other words, the inward virtue, there should be more of it than the external behavior. Now, some may disagree with that, but I think he really wants the emphasis to be on the internal virtue. What is going on inside of us needs to be far greater than what is seen outside. Now, I know some will say, wait. If the internal virtue is there, it will show up externally. I think what he's just trying to say, there should be such a strong internal foundation of virtue that's always greater than what is even seen. So I think that's something that we have to consider. And he says there ought to be much more within than is perceived without. And this is the reason he states this. For God beholds us, and then there's scriptures offered here. We have Psalm 33:13. Let's look at these scriptures. Psalm 33:13. Psalm 33:13. Let's see if sometimes the use of scripture here in this book is helpful, sometimes it's not. Oh, here we go. Psalm 33:13. Psalm 33:13 reads this way: The Lord looketh from heaven, he beholdeth all the sons of men. I think what he wants us to understand is that God beholds, God sees, God looks at us. He beholds us. He's aware of what we are doing. They also have Hebrews 4:13. Hebrews 4:13 listed here. Hebrews 4:13, which we read these words. Hebrews 4:13. Okay, Hebrews 4:13. Neither is there any creature that is not manifest in his sight, but all things are naked and opened unto the eyes of him with whom we have to do. That's Hebrews 4:13. What Thomas à Kempis wants us to understand is that God beholds us and he sees within us. He sees the external, he sees the internal. He sees inside of us. And that's what we need to be aware of, that God doesn't, sometimes we convince ourselves that God's only concerned with the external behavior. But the internal virtue must be present, not just the external behavioral modification that we somehow perfect, I think sometimes within the Christian world. Right? So let me read this all again. The life of a good religious person ought to be mighty in all virtues, that he may inwardly be such as outwardly he seems to men. And with reason there ought to be much more within than is perceived without. For God beholds us, whom we are bound most highly to reverence, wherever we are, and to walk in purity like angels in his sight. That we should focus on an internal purity that God will behold. Now, that internal purity should obviously start manifesting itself externally, but he's just really putting the emphasis on, again, I'm going to continue to say it this way. The internal virtue must be greater than the external show. The internal virtue must be there. Internal virtue is what must drive everything. And I think our efforts are on the, look, let's just be honest. Just think about this in the most fleshly, physical way. We spend a lot of time, more people maybe than others, focusing on the external aspects of our appearance, right? Hair, we get a haircut, shave, females, makeup, jewelry, clothes. We do a lot about the external appearance. And sometimes if you think about it, how much time do you spend on your external appearance, maybe working out, diet, whatever, all the different things you may do. And then think about the things you do around people, so because you want to be perceived a certain way. Just think about how much focus you give to the external person. The way you act around people. Okay, I'm not going to say that around people. I'm not going to do this around people. You're focused on the external appearance. How much time do you give in contrast to the focus on the external person to the internal person? Now, we do that just from a fleshly standpoint, but we also do that in a spiritual standpoint. We take that same mindset and say, okay, spiritually, this is the way I need to look. This is the way I need to sound. This is the way I need to come across. But how much time is spent on the internal virtues? And we have to understand that God beholds the internal person. He sees those virtues or lack thereof. Right now, this is what he says. So there's kind of the thesis. The thesis is the internal person. The internal person has to be, those virtues must be present. So then in the next paragraph, he's now going to say, okay, in a sense, here's what we have to do to try to develop those internal virtues. Look what he does. Next paragraph. We ought daily to renew our purpose and to stir up ourselves to fervor, as though we had for the first time today entered the Christian life, and to say, help me, O Lord God, in this my good purpose and in thy holy service, and grant that I may know this day begin perfectly, for that which I have done hitherto is as nothing. All right, there's a lot here to try to unpack. A lot here to unpack. So he says the first thing we need to do, if we're going to look at these kind of these exercises that we must do, and remember that the whole goal is that the internal virtues are present, and then that matches the outward show, if that makes sense. The outward appearance, the internal reality must match the outward appearance. And the way that we start with this, the first exercise, is that we have to renew. We ought daily to renew our purpose and to stir up ourselves to fervor. That each day we have to renew not only our purpose. What is my purpose? What am I trying to accomplish here? But we have to stir up ourselves to a spiritual fervor, to a zeal, a passion. We have to stir it back up. And he says to stir it up as though we had for the first time today entered the Christian life. We need to stir up ourselves internally, that we act like today is the first day of our Christian life. Today is the first day being a Christian. And that excitement needs to be made manifest. It needs to arise from within us. Not that we just try to pretend to have that excitement, but it arises from within us. He says, and then we say this, help me, O Lord God, in this my good purpose and in thy holy service, and grant that I may know this day began perfectly, or that I may now now this day begin perfectly, not no, that I may now this day begin perfectly. So he's like, Lord, help me right now. Help me right now, Lord, help me in my purpose in your holy service, and grant that I may know this day, that I may now, I keep saying no, that I may now this day begin perfectly. Let me begin this day perfectly. So he's saying each day we need to wake up to commit ourselves to our purpose and to stir up this kind of a fervor inside of us that we feel like today is the first day of our Christian life. And then we ask God that we may now grant this day perfectly. Let me begin this day the right way. And I love this part. For that which I have done hitherto is as nothing. Who cares what I've done yesterday? Who cares what I did last week? Who cares what I did last month? Who cares what I did 3 years ago? It all starts again today. And I think that's it's renewing. It's waking up going, today is the day. Today is the day that I have. This is the day I have. I can't worry about yesterday. Can't worry about my victories or my failures. I can't go back. I can't change them. I can't live today. I can't live today in light of my past victories, and I can't live today in light of my past failures. All I have is today. So let me commit myself today as if today was the first day of my Christian life. And he's saying that that's the kind of thing that we have to stir ourselves up to, because if we don't, then I think he's going to argue everything's going to go off the track right from the beginning. We've got to now, today, start the day perfectly with acting like today is the first day of your Christian life. Today is the first day of your Christian life. And you have that passion and that zeal for God's purpose, for his holy service. Now, I don't know if we can truly accomplish that on a daily basis. I don't know if we can. It's hard, because it's hard to go today, to view today like it's the first day of your Christian life. But in a roundabout way, if we can pull that off, I think that's beneficial, because we either try to live in light of our past victories, and we somehow rest on, look at all the things I've done in my Christian life, or we start the day off going, yeah, another day in my Christian life, but remember what I did 4 years ago. Remember what I did 5 years ago. Remember what I did 6 years ago. Remember what I did 3 years, whatever the time period is. You can't do that. You have to we have to leave the past, forgetting the things that lie behind, and we got to press forward. I think that's a biblical principle. How we pull that off is not easy, but I think it's a very important principle that he's articulating right there. Let's continue. According to our purpose shall be the course of our spiritual profiting, and much diligence is necessary to him who will profit much. All right. So he says, so we're going to try to set off like today is the first day of our Christian life. And and what we're going to focus on, and a purpose shall be the course of our spiritual profiting. So according to our purpose shall be the course of our spiritual profiting, and much diligence is necessary to him who will profit much. So we have to be focusing on our purpose, on our spiritual profiting, benefiting spiritually, and it's going to require diligence. It's going to require effort if we really want to, as he puts it, profit much. Next, he continues. And if he who firmly purposes often fails, what shall he do who seldom or with little firmness purposes anything? It turns out in various ways that we leave off our purpose, and yet the light emission of spiritual exercises seldom passes without some loss to our souls. The purpose of just men depends not upon their own wisdom, but upon God's grace, on whom too they always rely for whatever they take in hand. For man purposes, but God disposes. Neither is the way of man in himself. All right? Now, there's a lot here that we could unpack. Give me 1 second. I'm going to grab another translation here. I'm going to grab another translation. Right? I'm looking at this same paragraph in a different translation. He says this, if a holy exercise, okay, no, let's go to this. I'm going to go back and read this paragraph in a different translation. According to our resolution, so is the rate of our progress, and much diligence is needful for him who would make good progress. Right? So how this translation is building this argument, your progress is going to be determined by your resolution, by your commitment. In other words, if you really want to progress spiritually, you got to put forth the effort. You've got to commit yourself to it. My other translation says this, according to our purpose shall be the course of our spiritual profiting. In other words, as this one states, according to your resolution is the rate of your progress. Your progress spiritually is going to be determined by how committed you are, how resolute you are in that. We understand this in the physical realm. Look, if you want to become healthy physically, a lot of that is going to be determined by the effort you put into it. Your diet, your commitment to that diet, to exercise, to doing those things. If you don't, you can only progress based off your commitment to doing so. If you're not committed, you won't. If you are, you will. We see this in so many aspects of life. Those who are typically committed to academic excellence tends to progress further than those who don't care. Those who are committed to learning the scriptures progress further than those who are not committed to it. I think it's a pretty basic argument here. So let me stay in this translation. According to our resolution, so is the rate of our progress, and much diligence is needful for him who would make good progress. For if he who resolveth bravely oftentimes falleth short, how shall it be with him who resolveth rarely or feebly? All right. So in other words, what he says here, sometimes those who have strong resolution, right, they really are resolved to do something, they oftentimes fall short. Even those who have great resolution and they're going to be committed to doing something, they find themselves oftentimes falling short of what they strived for. So what he says is, with that in mind, how shall it be with the person who resolves rarely or feebly? If the person who has strong resolutions often falls short, then what's going to be of the people who don't have a strong resolution? They're not going to progress at all. It says, but manifold causes bring about abandonment of our resolution. Yet a trivial omission of holy exercises can hardly be made without some loss to us. The resolution of the righteous dependeth more upon the grace of God than upon their own wisdom, for in him they always put their trust, whatsoever they take in hand. For man proposeth, but God disposeth. And the way of man is not in himself. What he wants us to see is this: that if we have to resolve ourselves for the spiritual purpose that we are called to fulfill, glorifying God, being a minister, all the different things God calls us to do, we have to be committed to that. And because even those who are committed are going to fall short, but if we're not even committed to it, then we're going to lose a lot. We're going to lose a lot spiritually. And he says that what we have to understand is that this really, as it says here in this translation, the purpose of just men depends not upon their own wisdom, but upon God's grace, on whom they always rely for whatsoever they taketh in hand. For man proposes, but God disposes. And then they quote Proverbs 16:9 there. Let me look at Proverbs 16:9. Look at Proverbs 16:9. Proverbs 16:9. A man's heart deviseth his way, but the Lord directeth his steps. So he's like, we have to be resolute. We have to be committed, but we have to ultimately we have to rely on God's grace and God's wisdom. Right? Now, let's continue. I'm back to a different translation here. If an accustomed exercise be sometimes omitted, either for some act of piety or profit to my brother, it may easily afterward be recovered. But if aught of a slothful mind, or out of carelessness we lightly forsake the same, it is blameworthy enough and will be felt to be hurtful. All right. Now, here, so he's talking about being committed. We have to really stir ourselves up. We have to be committed in doing that. And then he says, if an accustomed exercise, so he's talking about these spiritual exercises that we engage in to try to accomplish the things he's telling us to accomplish. He goes, sometimes if we omit one of these exercises for some act of piety or profit to my brother, if we put off an exercise, spiritual exercise, to benefit someone or to help someone or to do some act of piety, it may easily be recovered. In other words, it's going to be easy to recover that spiritual exercise and get right back to it because you stop doing it for a good cause. But if you omitted the spiritual exercises because of a slothful mind or out of carelessness, we lightly forsake the same, it is blameworthy enough and will be felt to be hurtful. That if we just abandon the spiritual exercises just because we're lazy, we just overlook it, we just whatever. Thomas can be saying it will be hurtful to our spiritual advancement. We're not going to be able to advance spiritually speaking. He goes on to say, let us do the best we can. We shall still easily fail in many things. So let's do the best we can. We will still easily fail in many things, yet we must always purpose some certain course, and especially against those failings which most of all hinder us. It's like all we can do is the best we can. We're still going to fall. We're still going to fail. That's just the reality of it. And that reality can never be forgotten. I know when the failure happens, now again, depending on the failure, because it's just really weird the way we do this as Christians. Some failure is perfectly acceptable, and other failure is the end of the known world, and that's the end, you go outside and get stoned to death because it's over. Some failure we see as big, some failure we don't, but the point is we're all going to fall. We're all going to fail, and we have to be prepared for that failure. We have to be. And the way Thomas à Kempis puts it is this. We do the best we can. We shall still easily fail in many things, yet we must always purpose some certain course, and especially against those failings which must most of all hinder us. We're going to fall, but we must always purpose some certain course. We cannot, our failure cannot be the thing that stops our progress. Our failure we just fall, but we get back up. We still have the same purpose in mind. We still have to and we have to then commit ourselves against those things that are causing us to fail. That certain failure that's hindering us, we have to work against it. But we can't allow failure to stop progress. Failure should delay progress. It does not stop it. It should not discourage it. It may delay it, but it should not discourage it. We have to get back up. We have to be committed. Again, in so many areas of life, you may fail, but does that mean you give up? Does that mean you're done? No, there's got to be a getting back up and moving forward. So what he's really trying to focus on here is that for a religious person, he really wants us to understand is that the internal virtue must match the outward show. All right, the internal virtue. And so we must strive. We must work. We must do everything in our power to strengthen and build up that internal virtue. And the way forward for him, the way Thomas à Kempis says, is that each day, we have to view each day with the same excitement, with the same passion, is that each day is the first day of our Christian life. We forget the victories, we forget the failures, and we commit ourselves to move forward. We dedicate, and your progress is going to be determined by your commitment, by your dedication, by your resolution, by your resolve. I'll put it that way. How resolved are you? How committed are you? That will determine how much progress you make. But we have to be prepared that we're going to fall. We're going to fall, but then we have to just remind ourselves of our purpose and stay committed to it. All right. Now, I would like, let's see here. How far do we have? Yeah. We'll just save the next, we'll save the rest for next time. Yeah, we'll save the rest for next time. Yeah, there's so much here to really unpack. I'm going to stop. This is one of those chapters that there's a lot here to just consider and think about, right? It's just a lot here to try to unpack. But I'm just going to leave it with you. I'm going to leave it with you. There's a lot of thoughts here that I would like to give and a lot of ways to unpack it. But I want us to just kind of struggle through what he's arguing. And look, we've got to be careful. Look, let's make this very clear. We need to make this clear, though. When you're reading Thomas à Kempis and you're reading a chapter like this, we have to be aware that, of course, he's looking at it from a Catholic theological perspective. All right. And there's a danger of reducing Christianity to a very works law-based kind of performance. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. At the same time, though, as Christians, as Protestants who reject Catholicism, yes, we believe that our salvation is dependent upon the finished work of Jesus Christ. It's not dependent upon what I do. It's dependent upon what he did. But we also know that as Christians, we are called to grow spiritually. The believers at the Church of Corinth were condemned because they were still babes in Christ. They were being rebuked for that. We need to grow in our spiritual life. We need to run the race to win. We need to cast off every weight. All of the different scriptures that talk about advancing in your Christian life as a newborn babe, desire the sincere milk of the word that you may grow thereby. We are called to grow. We are called to pursue holiness. We are called to pursue godliness. There is an aspect that we have to dedicate ourselves to that. And so we don't ever want to use the grace of God as an excuse for an ungodly life. We don't ever want to make it an excuse. We rely on God's grace because our position before God is secure, but that we have to dedicate ourselves to spiritual growth and moving forward in the spiritual life. And I think we have a tendency to overlook it. Now, you could say, well, he's very works-based here, and yes, we could argue against it. But at the same time, there is a truth here that we need to take to ourselves. How committed are you to the internal virtues being developed so that the internal matches the external? How committed are you to God's purpose? How committed are you to his holy service? How truly committed are you? I think that is a valuable piece of I think there's a valuable challenge that is being presented to us in this chapter. I think there is. All right, but I'll stop there. So much more I could say, but I'll stop right there. All right. Email me, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. We'll finish that chapter up the next time we pick up the book, The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. It's been a long journey through the book, but I think it's been beneficial, and I'm challenged every time I open it. So hopefully you are as well. All right, I say all of that to say thank you for listening. Everyone have a great day. God bless.